Is it true that women are more prone to weight gain? And what about vegan protein? That is more advisable or animal protein?
It's the holistic protein which is important. Vegan protein again contains a mix of carbohydrate.
So in the younger age, if they have PCOS, so you think they are more prone to obesity when they go through menopause? I've seen more girls being pushed towards diabetics eventually after pregnancy or during pregnancy.
Ultra processed food, UPFs, are the biggest problem.
Hello everyone. Here we have Dr. Anand Annamale. He is a good friend of ours, and he is a MRCP from UK, trained endocrinologist from Cambridge. He's got a long list of publications and researches to his name in different parts of the world, and he's got several awards for his excellence in his research and the paper presentations. So welcome, Anand. It's
Thank you.
great to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Well, first we are going to talk about, his favorite subjects includes, of course, endocrinology. Now, what we want to talk about is the most burning topic of the world, obesity and endocrinology. How is it related?
Well, hormones are like the backbone for obesity. So, obesity is pretty complex. It's not very simplistic. I think, that's the problem, which people face.
True.
They try to put it into like a simple math figure, which unfortunately it's not.
True.
It's a jigsaw puzzle, which has a lot of variables and a lot of interplay. So it's a lot of things happening at the same time, interconnected with hormones, if I'd like to summarize that.
Yeah, that's very true, because in the market you see so many different types of diets and so many diet plans, and there are still many people who have tried anything and everything and nothing works on them. Is it true that women are more prone to weight gain?
Yes, in terms of, like, if you look at official statistics, compared to men, women tend to gain more weight.
Yeah.
And more so, increasingly, the increment also is more in women compared to men.
Yes. That is because thanks to all the hormones which are there, right?
Well, yes, thanks to it, because basically, it does bless them also. So,
Yeah, true.
count your blessings is what I would say.
Because there are so many other issues, right? If you have to start from a younger age also, those PCOS also is a problem. And then as they grow older also, menopause is also a problem. Though it's, I do not know what we should call it, because menopause comes with its own package, There's so many things, and weight is gifted.
Very true. So, yes, you're right, because basically, women go through different phases, and obviously the phases, correspond to the phases of the hormones. So estrogen, obviously, the main hormone basically is the main driver, I would say. So estrogen tends to protect people, especially when they are young and especially when they're premenopausal. And obviously when they reach menopause, they lack estrogen and they lose the protective effects. As far as weight is concerned, obviously, you have estrogen, which actually drives basically fat into particular areas, which basically, is beneficial actually. And it doesn't do the same thing for men. So, so as I said, count your blessings. So, it does have thing. However, after menopause, unfortunately, women become like men in terms of the risk factors to, chronic diseases like heart, in relation to chronic non-communicable diseases, with relevance to the lack of estrogen. And this compounded with other hormones, especially insulin, which basically, as you mentioned, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which basically is primarily driven by insulin. Now, insulin is a strong signal, which actually increases and actually kind of overrides everything. And that basically is a problem. So insulin not acting appropriately is the problem. And estrogen actually weaning down and going down is also another problem.
So in the younger age, if they have PCOS, so you think they are more prone to obesity when they go through menopause?
Yes, because when you say, people have PCOS, as I said, the primary driver is insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone which actually regulates glucose. So it's actually an anabolic hormone, which means basically it's a build-up hormone. So it tries to kind of, build everything and store everything. So it's actually a good hormone because, it is very important. But then it goes haywire, meaning it's not working effectively. So it's kind of pushing, your glucose into the cells, not inappropriately. So it goes into an overdrive and it tries to kind of, work more than what it should be doing. And it's driving in things which it should not be doing. So it drives fats inside into each cell. So, and then it becomes very stubborn. So it's like your fat driver into the cell, it pushes it inside and it locks it. So, and then it doesn't come out at all.
So bad, I know.
I know. So that's a problem. And then you take estrogen on top of this.
Yeah.
Now, estrogen, as I said, drives basically fat, particularly into the buttocks and the thighs. So we call it gluteofemoral. And that is protective. Now, when people reach menopause, the estrogen effect goes away. So that means they don't have that fat distribution over there. And insulin drives the fat a little bit higher. So it goes like from the buttocks and the thigh into the center. And that becomes a problem. So you have the lack of estrogen and the high insulin actually driving fat more above, meaning more centrally into like, the liver and inside the abdomen, which is the wrong place for the fat to be. And that basically is havoc.
And that will also create a lot of commotion in the system.
Correct. So it actually, it actually is like a vicious cycle. It basically goes, on and on. It accelerates and it accelerates this process. And then basically it becomes a big problem because, people are trying to fight this. So people need to understand what the problem is and then to work with this. I think that's the key.
So tell us about how to work on this because, there are so many diets, so many things available, and there are so many women who need help. So probably this is one thing, especially menopause, is taking over everybody by a storm. So, and now at least they're openly discussing it. I think earlier, the previous generation, I don't know how they managed it. They never spoke about it. They never came out with it. Now at least there are some medications and other things available. But nevertheless, in spite of that, there are many people who need help. So could you give your pearls of wisdom on
Correct.
that?
So I think, it's not like a switch. Everyone thinks like, okay, people are premenopausal and then they switch off and then they just become postmenopausal. It's actually a process.
True.
And I think people need to understand that. So if really people are looking at in terms of longevity, in terms of, I want a healthy life, I want to make sure that I don't gain weight, they'll have to start early. And I think that's where the problem is. Everyone starts, kind of jumping around, doing all the food fads and, different kinds of things when they actually reach the point of menopause. Lots of data actually states that, when people start doing things adequately in the premenopausal era, meaning, you've got to start at least 5-6 years or even earlier if you really want, a proper kind of, let's say weight and a balanced health later in life. And that's where people miss it. So when they start early, and when we say about lifestyle and diet, it's not too simplistic. It's not just about, I've got this calorie in and calorie out, I burn it out, and then, I'm fine, or I'm going to go on this restrictive diet, and basically it's going to be, okay. Because if you look at lots of diets, we get people coming and asking us, look, I'm doing everything right, so I'm really starving, right? I'm not really, doing anything wrong, but still my weight's not coming down. I mean, this is a common problem which people face. So it's not as simplistic as just, it's calories which you've restricted. So basically, you're going to make sure that you lose weight. What people need to understand, as we said about polycystic ovaries, is the insulin. So you need to ensure that whatever diet, the so-called diet which you use as a metric to say, is this the right diet? You need to make sure that you're doing the diet right. Because if you have any kind of diet which is going to increase the insulin, that's actually going to backfire.
Okay.
And that's the problem. So it's not about the quantity, it's the quality of the diet. So let's say you have an ultra-processed food which comes in like, in between bursts, it's going to spike it. Let's say you have binges, it's going to, kind of increase it. Let's say you have periods of starvation and then suddenly you start eating again, you're going to peak and trough the insulin. And that's where the problem is. And that's what I said, consistency is the key. And yes, you need to be mindful. So I said mindful, and you also have to be, portion control is important. You need to ensure that basically you don't go like too extreme. People go like, keto, people go like extremely carb, no carb, zero carb. I think it's a balance. And I think it's essential you maintain that balance in such a way that, your carbohydrate content is balanced if you have polycystic ovaries. Remember, the diet has to be individualized. It's not like one size fit all for everyone. And I think that's the key. Because everyone thinks, okay, let me follow this for this time. Let me follow intermittent fasting. Let me follow a keto. Let me follow, let's say a milk diet. There are so many different fashionable diets.
I know.
But it doesn't.
So the number is too long actually, the type of diet. And it does work for some people. And there are some exceptionally stubborn, obese people who nothing works for them also.
No, that's an important point because, that's where I think it's important that people understand their hormones. So if basically someone basically has a stubborn weight and it's not coming off, they're doing everything right, I think it's important that, they ensure that their hormones are right. For example, you have a lot of people with thyroid dysfunction, people who have the thyroid's not working. Now, if you're not going to correct that, that's not going to get better. Let's say they are stressed, they have a lot of cortisol floating around, they're not sleeping right. That would actually drive the cortisol and stress hormones like over the roof. And that would override whatever diet you're doing. So certain fundamental aspects, ensure you have adequate sleep. When we say adequate sleep, at least 8 hours. And even if it's like, 1 or 2 days when you basically lose sleep, it could drive, the other way around. Okay. So that's important. So ensure that you have a peaceful mind, you have a happy-go-lucky attitude. And those are all important aspects in kind of weight management. It's not just about, oh, I've restricted my diet, I'm doing everything, I'm going to the gym, I'm jumping around. No. If you're jumping around too much, your stress goes up. The cortisol will actually drive more problems. So you see, it's a fine balance, and it has to be individualized. And even for that particular person, it can change from time to time. I guess it's a conversation that each individual has to have with themselves, basically. Okay. And it's not a regimental regime that you have to follow this and these patterns have to. You could have certain periods where basically let's say you're not able to do what you would routinely do and probably change, but you come back to your routine, change your routine. Those are important aspects. And as I mentioned, lots of times people are stressed, people are overworked, people don't sleep, and this would override anything. And on top of this, let's say they have a high insulin floating around, you go hung-ho on whatever, your gym, you go on your treadmill, you're not going to burn that. It's going to retain, it's going to actually, compound things factor, and it's actually going to gain.
Yeah. So now PCOS, that's another one big bummer, whatever you do, you gain weight. And to keep the PCOS under bay, you have to lose weight.
Correct.
So that's such a vicious cycle. I find these young girls go through so much, And then one more thing I've seen is if you give them tablets like to control the insulin, as most of the time metformin is given, and you cannot withdraw it either. It becomes such a problem. And then if during pregnancy, it's again an issue. And then post-pregnancy, I've seen more girls being pushed towards diabetics eventually after pregnancy or during pregnancy if they have been on metformin for a long time. Sure. So what's your take on that?
So I think, the most important concept about polycystic ovaries is, everyone thinks that, women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, are actually obese. Yeah. And, the so-called lean people are actually normal. Now, but
there are many lean PCOS.
Correct. Also, so as this definition about lean, that's the $1 million question. So there's something called body composition analyses where basically you look at body fat.
Okay.
So you have the body fat, as we were talking about, in the wrong places. Oh. So for example, if your body fat inside your, your abdomen, or as we would say viscera, is pretty high, then basically your chances of PCOS are pretty high. So you can have the so-called normal body mass index person. So, we measure the BMI by weight divided by height square. And when we say from an Indian context, the normal body mass index is 18 to 23. Okay. So it is not like the Western, context. So anyone greater than 23 is overweight. So, so you can see that the amount of, the overweight and obesity in India. Now you have a lot of people who with a body mass index of 21 or, even 19 and 20, having polycystic ovarian syndrome. Yeah. Now, if you do a body composition analysis, you will find that their intra-abdominal fat and central fat is pretty high. Oh. Now, this is a concept called metabolic obesity normal weight, and this is pretty prevalent in India. And there was a recent article which actually came out looking at this particular subset, and it was pretty high. Pretty high.
I know it's quite high because I have seen a lot of girls and they say they do everything right, and you give them this drugs for the insulin resistance, and what they find is they always are giddy, and then they find it very difficult, and they become sick because of the medication, and actually nothing is helping.
The question is, because again, I think this is where people get this wrong, because the reason they're feeling giddy is because their insulin levels are still high. Okay. And they're not bringing it down. So the medicine is helping them, but let's say they're not following basic rules, diet discipline. Let's say they're not eating at the appropriate times. People tend to, skip their breakfast. People tend to eat a little late. They just tend to just go on they take beverages, sugar-sweetened beverages. Ultra-processed food, UPFs, are the biggest problem. People rely on it a lot.
Today it's very
exactly.
high, yeah.
And they look at it as a quantity. So people look at food as a quantity. They say, oh, I've consumed only a small quantity. They don't look at the quality, and that's the problem. And any ultra-processed food basically is a problem. And interestingly, today's article from Lancet, which basically is a landmark journal, states that the UPF is highest in a country like India. And that has increased
No, that's very true, actually.
yeah, that's increased 40-fold. That's not a small number.
Yeah, it
So-
wasn't like this before.
Yeah, so you can understand, like ultra-processed food, you mean like sugar-sweetened beverages. You go, you have soft drinks, you have juices. So people think juice is healthy. But no, the whole fruit is different. You get everything. You get the fiber, you digest it, you actually, assimilate it properly. Whereas a sugar-sweetened beverage, or even, without sugar, the beverage is going to be a problem. So people tend to go to packaged foods. So they open package. So you have a lot of flavoring substances, you have stabilizers, you have emulsifiers, you have all these kind of things, colorants, flavorants, and all these actually, cause havoc in the insulin. So it's not just about them eating, a lot. It's eating wrong. And the problem is these are addictive. So in fact, these particular food items are like tobacco. It drives them to eat more.
True,
So,
that is true.
they start eating, they just can't stop.
Yeah.
So you call it the hedonic response, and they want more. They want more. And then they think, okay, I've done enough, I'll stop here. But they've done the havoc, and that's the problem. So you see, polycystic ovaries, that's the problem. So when we're talking about lean or obesity in terms of polycystic ovarian syndrome, the medication does help, but always, it's the lifestyle and diet which has to be consistent. Again, coming to the same fact. And as they're consistent, people do well. So it's not like, oh, you got polycystic ovarian syndrome, these girls don't do well, these girls have to become obese. As I said, if they start early and they start appropriate lifestyle very early on, they understand their body and understand their hormones, they actually do pretty well. I mean, we have two subset of people with polycystic ovarian syndrome. One subset who understand it very well and they're able to manage it. They don't require a lot of times they don't require medicines. They don't require our help to fall pregnant, and even postmenopausally, they do pretty well. So these are the ones who actually understand it very well. There are people, unfortunately, who actually think that they're doing everything right. So, for example, if let's say they go on a diet which basically is restrictive, because everyone thinks a hypocaloric diet is the way forward. So you cut your calories, you basically you should actually improve. But then if they're just cutting their calories and not exercising, then they're not making their insulin work. So insulin is, as I said, it's like the key. It opens up, glucose into the cells in the muscle, in the adipose tissue, and most cells. So you need the lock and the key. And if you don't do that, then there's no point. So it's not going to help. And equally, if you have a diet which has a high carbohydrate-based diet, it's actually going to do the same thing. And again, coming back to the UPF, ultra-processed food, it's the same thing. So there you go.
Very well explained. Well, when you said so many things, so I just wanted to pick your brain on what kind of a diet would you advise then? Because everybody says protein, and then they are on whey protein, this protein, that protein, and then after a few days the kidney is a problem.
Correct.
And then even exercises. So they say, this form of exercise or high intensity exercise because you go to burn out and everything. And then they come with other problems. So what, according to your experience and of course your research and everything, just tell us what would be the perfect balance.
So as you say, life is about a perfect balance.
Yeah.
So it's a balance about everything. So in terms of food, especially in terms of diet, especially with high protein, the concept comes because, proteins basically, are very important for, let's say, satiety. It gives people a sense of satisfaction that they've eaten. And obviously, it is important for muscle. And that's where the concept about using proteins. But the problem is, nothing can replace nature's protein instead of a protein shake or say a protein bar. All of these basically have refined carbohydrates. So to make it palatable, most of these protein shakes actually have a lot of glucose.
Yeah, true.
They have, hidden sugars. They have, complex carbohydrates, paralleled in it, which actually makes it palatable. So you're actually still driving the insulin resistance. So again, that's the same problem. And if you look at the bars, although it says low carb, it still has carb, and it has, obviously the flavoring agents and things we were talking about.
And the sugars are very high.
Exactly. So instead of that, let's say just a bowl of, say, chicken with some vegetables would do the same trick. Why do we need to go into those kind of, kind of extreme diets? So the concept about protein, yes, it's important. It's important that we actually reduce the carbohydrate content, but not it's not absolutely zero. We don't have to go there. So if you look at a diet, which probably, would help the insulin resistance, the perfect example is the Mediterranean diet. And basically that has a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
So the Mediterranean diet, actually focuses on what a lot of, our grandmothers and grandfathers would tell us. Eat a lot of veggies, eat a lot of fruits. But basically it's whole vegetables and whole fruits. It's not juices, it's not crushed. Because then people crush it, they make, kind of concoctions, and gone. You've got, the quality is gone. So you want the entire macronutrient quality, the micronutrient quality, and all the goodness in it. And that's important. And you want to eat it and digest it. And I think that's where the problem is. And that's what we need to focus on. So the Mediterranean diet focuses a lot on this. It focuses on lean meat, so like fish. It focuses on basically, like poultry. It focuses on a lot of portions of veggies and fruits, legumes, whole grains, and olives, nuts. So it's a complete package. And this is basically, it's a complete comprehensive thing with adequate balance of all the macronutrients. So it's not about, oh, this macronutrient, it's carb less, or, fat high, or protein, intermediate. It's a balance of all these.
True.
So if you were to look at a diet, that's probably the diet which you should be actually looking at in terms of insulin resistance. Now, as far as physical activity, so again, physical activity, the consistency is important. So it's not about, oh, you go for a burst and then you stop.
That many people do that.
That's the problem. So it's the consistency which helps. And remember, in the weight loss process, the physical activity would prevent the weight regain. It's not going to, make your weight come down dramatically. However, once you lose your weight with all the appropriate measures in terms of lifestyle and diet, and along with medicines where necessary, it would help you maintain, and it would continuously do so. So the consistency of that is important. So it's not the duration, it's not the intensity. So as you mentioned, a lot of people go into these high intensity trainings.
Yes, true.
It's not really required. So, you basically would need, a few, kind of sessions of resistance training, which is important, which obviously would build muscle and actually, that would actually increase the basal metabolic rate and increase, let's say, the burning capacity in terms of, making sure that basically you're losing weight adequately with the diet, appropriate diet you're taking. However, basically it's important that you balance both of these together. And I think that's the key. So even just a consistent walk of 45 minutes a day is important. Research shows that 7,000 steps per day is reasonably adequate. You reach up to 10,000, pretty good. But you need not do 20,000. You need not do 30,000. Now people, that's the problem. You stress it out, you're going to push your cortisol, and you're going to get stressed out, and this is just going to go again or again.
So Dr. Anand, you were speaking about proteins. The diet sounded absolutely fabulous, and it's very true. Your grandma's diet is the best diet. Or your parents, whatever they gave you also. I think even our generation, we had a very normal diet from our parents, but now the next generation is like having a lot of other things to
Correct.
eat. So anyways, so what I was thinking was, the diet which you mentioned is a very ideal diet. And it is possible for somebody who has everything set right, or has the time and the energy to do all these things and all. But in today's fast-paced world, it's very tough. So many of them just scoop the protein, mix it, and they say it's equivalent to that, so what does it matter? So I'm taking my protein in, so this is a quick fix. But do you think that is plus or minus?
Well, basically, unfortunately not, is what I
Okay.
would say. Because basically, when they take these protein powders, the Indian taste buds, basically, people are very, very, finicky. They really want, something tasty.
True.
They want that diet to taste good, and they're happy to do the restricted diet. So what happens in these protein powders, people need to kind of mix it with something which makes it palatable. That means they will need to bring in some form of carbohydrate, as I was saying. So, you lose the kind of plot there. You're not really going to give them the correct protein balance. So if you make it too kind of, let's say, proteinaceous, that means it's not going to be very palatable, and people are not going to like it, and that's a problem. So most of these, obviously, the powders or the shakes, basically, as I said, they're not holistic. They don't have the right balance between the macro, the micro, the bulk, the fiber. All those things are missing there.
Very
And
true.
That's the problem. So I generally would say, well, you could try it, but basically, remember, you use it where basically, you're using, let's say you're using it for polycystic ovaries. If that's got too much carbohydrate, it's going to be
That's not-
counterproductive.
right.
So clearly, it's not going to help. So.
And what about vegan protein? That is more advisable, or animal protein?
See, again, I think, it's the holistic protein which is important. So basically, I mean, if someone, an egg is an ideal protein. So, a vegan protein, for people who are not able to take meat is fine. But vegan protein again contains a mix of carbohydrate. Let's say, for example, you take, chana.
Yeah.
Now, chana is not pure protein. People think,
Right.
it's protein.
Yeah, but it
It
has
is.
got
Yeah, it
lot of
is.
carbs.
Even your soybean has protein, but it's got carbohydrates also. So if you overdo that, and this is what I'm talking about, mindful eating and portion size, people think I'm taking a lot of protein, I'm taking a lot of chana. No, you're actually taking a lot of calories at the end of the day.
Oh,
So that's what I said. So it has to be individualized to the person, and it has to be, and it can vary from time to time. It's a personal journey, and the personal journey. So I think it's a lot of understanding that the person also needs to get. So it's an understanding of how their health is, what they need to do, and how they take it forward. I think once they get that, and they'll be fine. And it's not
so
quick
that's like,
fix.
trial and error.
Correct. It's
And
not
I
the-
think it has to be tried by the person who is doing it.
Exactly.
And then they figure out a way that this is what works well for me.
Correct. And again, choose the appropriate advice. Don't go to Instagram. Don't
know.
speak to your friend. Speak to the appropriate people. So speak to qualified dietitians. Speak to people who will actually advise you appropriately, medical professionals. I think this is what is important.
Now, there are many women, as they keep aging, they find themselves getting very sluggish, or they feel tired all the time. And actually, if you have to listen to their story, they do it all right, they'll be doing their yoga or some walking, then they're talking to friends, and they say they sleep quite decently well also, and they're eating a good diet also. Probably a little bit here and there, but then still they have it. And many women I've seen during perimenopause, they come and complain about this. So is there something missing?
Correct. So basically, if someone's basically saying that they're getting more fatigued, they're doing everything right, and they still don't feel right, then it's important that we actually check their hormones.
Okay.
And a lot of times, basically, we do find that these people have some form of thyroid dysfunction. Now,
Okay, yeah.
thyroid's the master regulator, it's the master
I know.
switch. So, the hormone basically regulates the basal metabolic rate. It basically, makes sure that your energy expenditure is appropriately controlled. So, it's like, if you don't get that right, and then you're doing everything right, it's like you've switched off the main lights.
Oh, that's so sad.
So, only if you correct that, everything will get itself
Yeah.
in the proper way. So, that's very important that people understand that. And the same thing goes with, the polycystic ovaries you were talking about. So basically the insulin is supposed to work, but it's not working. So it's like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. So it's supposed to push the glucose inside. The glucose is not really going inside. And basically the cells are starved. The cells are thinking, hey, I don't have any glucose. So it's sending signals and the insulin is kind of producing more. And what does the insulin do? It stores fat and it locks it up.
Oh.
That's
And
the
they
problem.
are eating also well.
Exactly.
And then they keep saying that, oh, I'm tired, I'm not feeling good.
That's the thing. So
yeah, that's what.
this is what I meant in terms of understanding. So I think it's important that people understand their hormonal conditions, and this is a pretty common condition, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's important they understand what the basics are and what they need to do. And only if they stick to it, basically, people do well. And as I said, a lot of people who do well actually stick to that. And then they say, look, I'm feeling really great. They come back, they say, I'm feeling really great. I'm doing good. But if you're not sticking to the basics, they come back to you and say, well, I'm still tired. I'm doing this and I'm doing everything right. But if you actually go through it, there are certain aspects which will look very minuscule, but still, probably not doing everything and addressing everything which is appropriate.
And as you said, the protein shakes on Instagram. Wow, everybody talks about it. And it's such a fad, that everybody carries something and then they're having their protein shakes on time and all the time, being very consistent with it. Well, there are actually on one side, as doctors, we see a lot of cases with kidney damage also. So where's the line to be drawn?
So this is the problem. So as I said, it has to be regulated. And unfortunately, this particular, this protein content which comes out through the social media, the different concoctions, the different things which people buy in, across the counter in the gymnasiums and other things, basically, these are not regulated. So you need to be very careful. So you don't know what, that particular product contains. There are regulatory authorities which actually would tell you what each, what food label it has, how much protein it has. And, you will need to, as I said, consult a doctor to say whether that would be an appropriate thing for them to take. Because let's say they have, let's say, diabetes, and they have, a problem in terms of early kidney damage, and if they're not doing the right thing, they could actually create more havoc.
Yeah.
So I think it's important they consult their medical professional before they do all those things. So always go back, ask the relevant professional to say, is this product okay, and not look at something which looks very kind of shiny on social media.
Shiny and shimmery on social media. Actually, social media is something like, a child lost in a candy store. It's so many things to look at, so many things attracting, and then you do not know what to do. This hormone weight gain is a very gradual process, right? So, so initial phases when you're gaining weight, you might think that you're gaining weight because of this. So, by the time you go through everything and you figure out your hormones are the problem, how do you fix, not the hormonal issue, of course, you got to fix it. I'm asking about how do you fix the weight, because it's not going to happen that it goes reverse immediately, right? So
that's an interesting question, actually, because see, the weight with relation to hormones can actually be even very quick.
Okay.
It can be pretty quick.
Right.
So let's say, for example, thyroid hormone per se. Thyroid, obviously, we've just spoken about it as a metabolic regulator in terms of basal metabolic rate, energy expenditure. It also basically controls how the kidney excretes water.
Okay.
So basically, let's say someone has thyroid issues. Let's say they have an underactive thyroid, or hypothyroidism as we'd call it, and they basically are taking thyroid medicines, and then suddenly they stop it for some reason. And a lot of times, people do this.
Yeah, they do.
Right? And
especially when they check their hormones, it's fine. So they said, why do you take a tablet now?
Exactly. Yeah. So they stop it. Now, you may find it dramatic that basically, they actually regain a lot of water, and they actually feel more bloated. So, and that can happen pretty quickly. And the other way around too, lots of people say you cannot use thyroid hormone as a weight loss medicine.
Oh, that also I've heard some people do.
Correct.
it.
So
they
basically,
take it in low doses.
Yeah. So again, in someone who has a normal thyroid, they should not be taking thyroid hormone medicines.
They shouldn't.
Because
never venture.
They've been, because if you're doing it when you have a normal thyroid, it can create more problems. So again, with someone with the low thyroid, just taking your thyroid hormone medicines alone and fixing your hormones is not going to be the fix entirely. And that's again the problem. So, and again, let's say like a hormone like cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Now, let's say someone's not sleeping adequately. The cortisol is going to go high. Let's say someone's a CEO of a particular industry, and they're really driven with problems in terms of what's happening in their industry, and they're stressed. Now that's basically going to go high, and that's going to be the driver along with insulin resistance, which would actually increase the weight. So unless they get that down, whatever they're going to do in terms of diet or whatever they're going to do in terms of physical activity is not going to overdrive and get this better. So that's why we're talking about the fundamentals, making sure the fundamentals are right. So, and that's where it's important.
I think after everything, you have to come back to your fundamentals, check, and then decide what else you can do next.
Exactly.
If there's something wrong in the fundamentals itself, then you got to fix that before you even think of doing something else.
Sure. Definitely.
So I think just sticking to a normal routine which you've already been doing, which works well for you, and then checking all your fundamentals and making sure that each box is ticked.
Correct.
And ticked not just like that, ticked, and make sure that it is tweaked to perfection.
Correct.
And then we think about something else.
It's even not in perfection. I just guess you tick it and you keep ticking it and you're consistent with it.
All right. So. Okay. That's a nice way to put it forward. That's good. So what's your advice to all the women out there who are so fed up of being, overweight or having so many hormone issues, so many problems with their lives? So
that's a very important question, because, a lot of women and, across the age groups, they come to you saying that, oh, look, I'm really fed up. I'm doing everything and I'm not just getting it right. So I think it's important that, as I mentioned, they need to understand it is personal. It's very personal. It is very individualized. And basically, they'll need to understand that it is not about, oh, am I losing my willpower? Am I not doing everything right? It's important that they understand their body. It's important that they understand the phases which they go through. And, as I mentioned, you start things early and go consistently is what is important. So there are 3-4 things I tell people. So I said, look, it's about your body, it's about your mind, it's about your spirits, and it's about your emotion. Now, these are the 4 important aspects which actually would regulate your hormones and regulate your weight. So take care of your body right is important. So when we say body right, make sure you put in things inside properly. The fuel you're going to put inside is your food. So mindful eating, as we were talking about.
True.
So that's very, very important. Portion control. Do away with ultra-processed food, which is the biggest problem right now. So it's not about quantity, as I mentioned, it's about quality. So that's very, very important. Then talking about the body, the physical activity is important. But again, moderation. Now, moderation is pretty much the key. Because people go with very high intensity levels. And research has proved that basically, increased physical activity more than what you would need would be detrimental. So I asked them, look, you want to lose your weight, yes, but what's your ultimate goal? You want to live healthy. There are a lot of people who basically, carry a lot of weight in terms of a number, but they're still healthy.
Yeah.
So that's something to understand. So treat your body well is what I always tell them. Yes, have your goals. Yes, you want to look good. Yes, you want to reduce your weight. What's a process? Please continue with that. Then we're talking about mind, the spirit, and emotions. So if you're in a stable state of mind, you're happy, yes, you will lose weight. If you're stressed, we're talking about the cortisol, that's basically going to create havoc, and it's not basically going to get, better. Looking at, emotions and looking at, where we are, sleep. This is another important aspect. So it's a balance of all these things which would help women maintain it properly. So remember, weight is not just a number. It's a way of life and how you live.
It's a fantastic way of putting it forward. Thanks a lot, Anand. It was wonderful having you. And I'm sure there are so many women out there who have been helped with this conversation. Thank you.